Hi, my name is SueAnn Saunders, and this is my testimony. I have a unique story. I was born in Korea, and I was adopted and came to America. My dad was an American soldier, and my mom was Korean. At the time, this was back in the late 60s, when the culture didn't really accept interracial marriages. And when my mom was 6 months pregnant, my dad was stationed back to the United States, and my mom had to remain in Korea. Unfortunately, at that time, she didn't have her paperwork, so she couldn't leave to the States with him, and so she was left in the country by herself. And at the time, she did have family there, but because it was culturally unacceptable, it was kind of a shame. And so she hid her pregnancy and proceeded to, raise me by herself. So for about the first 3 years of my life, I don't really remember a lot. I don't know if because of the circumstances or not, or if maybe God blocked those out of my mind, because from what I've heard, they weren't the best experiences. But fortunately, I was lucky because there was another Korean lady who found me at the time and saw that my circumstances weren't that great, and she convinced my mother to put me up for adoption so that I could have a better life. And at the time, she was a little hesitant, and my dad wasn't involved. He was in the States. And after a little back and forth and stuff, I guess they both agreed to put me up for adoption at the time. And so I was 3, I didn't speak English, wasn't in the best shape and such, and I got adopted and we moved to Hawaii. And so obviously it was a new experience, a new language, new culture, new people that I didn't know. And so it was a bit scary. And so I guess maybe that's why I don't remember much. And then we came here to the United States, just learning the language was difficult. And it was quite a struggle. But I had a really great adoptive mom who was very loving and caring. And we traveled a lot, and that was difficult as well. Mom was Korean and Catholic, and then my dad was Jewish. Neither one practiced their faith. And so I didn't know a lot about religion or God. Though I did visit my in-laws quite a bit, and they were from Boston on my dad's side, and they practiced the Jewish faith. So I was exposed to like the, what are some of the Jewish,
Passover.
like Passover, Rosh Hashanah, and such. But it was Hanukkah, yes. But we did celebrate Christmas.
What was it like being adopted? What was the emotion you felt? Did you feel like finally did you feel safe? Was it awkward?
I didn't find out I was adopted until I was 9.
Okay, so you don't even remember.
As far as I knew, I grew up in a normal lifestyle. The only reason I knew I was adopted is because my adoptive dad at the time insisted that I know, because he didn't want me to grow up and be an adult and then find out and be resentful. And so when I was 9, both of them sat down with me and told me, you know, you're adopted, do you know what that means? And I said, no. And so he proceeded to explain to me, and I just said, okay. And I think because there wasn't a difference in looks, like my mom was Korean and my dad was American, nobody ever questioned it.
Okay.
And so I didn't really stand out. But it wasn't until I got older that I started questioning about my parents and such like that. But I was starting to have dreams like when I was about 10. And it was, I guess, me as a baby, maybe a year and a half, like standing in a crib and just like crying my eyes out. And there's a woman just sitting at the edge of the bed, and she's just staring at me, but she's not coming to console me or pick me up. It seemed like it was more of a nuisance to her. But the one distinguishing mark that I remember is that she had like a little birthmark right above her lip. And so I kept having these dreams throughout my childhood and such. And then when I became a senior, it became really prevalent, and it was so frequent. And at the time, I was dating my husband, Ray, and he was telling me that, there's a reason why you're having these dreams. And so I couldn't figure out, maybe because I'm getting into adulthood, I don't know what the situation was. And so I kept asking my mother throughout the child when I kept having the dreams, do you know who this lady is? I said, because it's the same lady that keeps popping up and popping up. And so the first couple of times she kind of dismayed it and said, oh, no, I don't know who that is, or why you're having those dreams. And so finally, when I was older, and she finally sat down after I asked her, I guess, too many times, and it was getting on her nerves, and she said, yes, that sounds like that's your real mom. And I guess it was strange because I didn't get overly excited. I wasn't really interested. I just said, oh, okay. And I think the reason being because growing up and I guess when I was asking her questions about my mom, she kind of told me some bad stories. And I guess I didn't want to deal with, I guess one, being adopted. When you're adopted and such, you wonder why your parents didn't want you. What were the circumstances that were so bad that they couldn't keep you? And so when she explained to me what some of the circumstances were, then I understood, but then I was a little upset too about it. So the other recollection that I have is when I was living in Korea. At the time, my real mom would let me go visit my adoptive mom at the time. And she would take me because she'd want, I guess she would feed me and, to buy me toys and take me for the day. And I guess kind of show me or provide me experience of, what a childhood is supposed to be like and what you're supposed to do. And I remember as a child growing to be very fond of her and wishing she was my mom. And I remember one time when I was staying at her house, my real mom came to visit or to come and get me, and I hid behind my adoptive mom's leg, and I was screaming and hollering, and I didn't want to go. And so, and I remember I said in Korean to her, I said, I don't like this lady. I don't want to go home with her. And so I think even as a child, I knew that I didn't feel love, and I knew she didn't want me, and I knew I wasn't being taken care of. And so I've always felt that God's had a presence in my life, even though I didn't know a lot about him, because when I look back now at the circumstances, a lot of things could have happened to me, and they didn't, and so I was very blessed in that sense. And the fact that he put Kim and Jack in my life was a true blessing, and I think it was a salvation for me, because even though growing up with them wasn't the perfect childhood and stuff, they provided me everything that I needed. The other interesting thing is when we came to the United States, I didn't speak the language. It was a struggle for me at school, and then you have to remember too, this was in the 70s, and Americans weren't very acceptive of, I think, the Asians at the time because of the Vietnam War and such. So I remember kind of through my elementary school and stuff kind of being picked on and being called names like slant and rice cake and pan face and things like that. So you add that on top of then having a Jewish last name, it was kind of like a double whammy. And that's where I kind of questioned my identity, because people would be like, well, you don't look Jewish, but you got a Jewish, last name. And this is before I found out I was adopted. And so that was very difficult. And I think the dream started, again, like I said, when I was 10, because my parents didn't have the best marriage. They fought a lot. They had total different personalities. and there wasn't a lot of love and affection in the house. My mom was a little bit better. My dad was not, and I think a lot of it has to do because he was raised without a mother, and so he didn't have that nurturing side. And so growing up, their relationship was volatile and stuff. And I remember being in elementary school and always asking my mom, "Why don't you guys get divorced? I mean, you're obviously unhappy." And she would always say, "Well, because I don't want you to grow up without a dad." And so that kind of put a burden on me, and I always felt guilty that she was staying in the marriage for that reason. And so growing up, so I didn't get to see the loving relationship. I didn't know what actually love is. I didn't know what affection was. It was very uncomfortable for me. And so when I met Ray in high school, his family was totally different. I mean, he talked about God all the time. He was very loving, affectionate, very understanding. His parents were like that. I remember the first time I went over to meet his parents, and I walked in the house, and his mom came and first of all, she came sliding in with some big bunny shoes and these half-cut pajama pants, and she was dancing, and I thought, oh my God. Parents were so reserved, and his were dancing, and she grabbed Ray and they were dancing, and I kind of felt this emotion, oh wow, this is awesome. And so I remember she came up to me and she hugged me, and I didn't know what to do. It was I just froze like this. It was what is this? And I didn't know, do I reciprocate? What do I do? So I kind of did one of, these, okay. And, but I am very thankful for the family because they helped me through a lot in my life. And one of the biggest things is they introduced me to the Lord. And I remember in high school, Ray said, do you want to give your life to the Lord? And I was scared, and I think the reason I was scared is because I didn't know anything. I felt ignorant. I didn't read the Bible. I didn't know anything about religion. The one thing that I did know about religion is, I don't know, in high school, the PTL club was really big with Jim Baker. And I remember one night watching that, and somehow it touched my life. I'd sit and I watched, and they'd say, they'd talk about God and prayer and stuff, and there were a couple of things that they would say that I guess I got really interested, and I started becoming curious. What is God all about? Evidently, he could do miracles. He's watched over me, so maybe it's something I need to understand. And so when Ray kind of came into my life, it was kind of parallel. It was oh, okay, so you know about God. So, explain to me, what am I missing out? So he took me to the power team and the big muscle guys. And I thought to myself, this is not church. This is not what I've seen on TV where you dress up and you go and you're quiet and you sing and you stay for church for 2 hours. As such, people are running around, dancing on the aisles, and I don't know. That's the night I changed my life because I gave my life to the Lord. I was still a little hesitant in my walk, but then I noticed after that my dreams started to become more and more frequent. And
you dream about your mother?
Yes, it was the same dream that I had when I was 10, and I was starting to get to a point where I couldn't just dismiss it and say, well, there's no relevance to this. And so that's when I decided at the time. I'd never told anybody I was adopted because my mom told me if I told people, they would look at me differently, that I would kind of be like a bastard or that nobody wanted me, and people would think that I should be ashamed. So I always hid it. And I pondered whether to tell Ray or not, and I did. One night I sat and I told him, and he was fine. He didn't look at me any differently. He didn't say anything derogatory, like why didn't your parents want you and stuff. He totally understood, and I thought, oh, okay, I guess it's not a big deal. And so I think that was the start of my walk, and the dream started coming. And then my mom, when I was 20, that she passed away suddenly, and I remember it was the weirdest feeling, because she and I were the only two that we had a relationship. I didn't have a relationship with my dad. He was very like, I put a roof over your head, I pay for your school, I take care of you, and I take care of the bare essentials, but that was it. And when I was 20, I was in nursing school. My passion was always to help people and children, because I guess I knew what it felt like. And I can recall that day I went out with my boyfriend. But the strange thing that caught me that night was I hadn't seen my mom in a couple weeks because of schedules. I was in college at the time, and she was working, and so I remember trying to rush out the door, and she grabbed me real quickly and she said, "Give me a hug." And I was like, "Mom," I'm like, "Really? I'm running late." She said, "No, give me a hug." And so I gave her a hug, and she said, "I love you," and a couple of other things. And I just kind of stopped, and I was like, "Oh, okay, well, I love you too." Not thinking anything. Went out, and at the time, I was 20, I had a curfew, which was at midnight, which I thought was ridiculous, but because I was living in my parents' home, I was respectful of that. And I remember coming home, and the house was just in shambles. Furniture was moved. I could see footprints all in the carpet, and nobody was home, which was really odd. And I got this eerie feeling that something was wrong, and I thought, well, maybe something happened to my dad, because he'd always had a lot of health problems. And so it was probably like 10 minutes later, and he walked through the door, and she didn't. And it still didn't hit me that there was, anything wrong. It's just I knew something had happened. And he just came and said, "Well, here, have a seat. I've got something to tell you." And I said, "Okay." And he said, "Your mom died this evening." And I remember just like starting to shake, and I felt emotion coming to the surface. But because we didn't have a good relationship, I did everything I could to not cry in front of him. And so he was like, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes." And I asked him what happened, and evidently she had a heart attack. And so he explained to me what happened. And after he explained to me what happened, I was very angry and upset with him, because I thought that he could have prevented some of it. What I found out was, I guess, she had symptoms of a heart attack early on, and she was ill, and he didn't take her to the hospital. And then a couple hours later, he found her dead on the floor. And so I had these emotions of losing a parent, but then also angry at another. And the only person I could think of was to go to Ray, and I was surprised he let me leave. And so I got in my car, drove over there. And I remember it was probably like 3 a.m. I'm like, well, should I wake him up? Should I tell him anything? And that's the sad part, is I was brought up that way with no emotion. And so I couldn't even cry. And so I remember I went to his window, and he was sharing a room with his brother. And I just kind of tapped on there. And he came to the window, and he was surprised. He's like, "What are you doing here?" Because he knew I had the curfew. And I remember I just said kind of coldly, "Oh, my mom just died." And so then he was like, "What?" And he went and woke his mother up, Mary Virginia. And then they brought me into the house. And I remember she just came and she just like hugged me. I still struggle with my walk with the Lord. get very hesitant of being like, I guess, like for me, when I see like Reese and Ray, and I see his mom, and I see that they have like total faith, and I mean, they give everything up to the Lord. I haven't gotten to that point. I question things like, and I know everybody has hardships, but like, I was adopted. My dad was not the best person or parent. He was a provider, but he wasn't, a sense, an emotional provider. And so for me growing up, I was always hesitant to have children because I didn't think I had the nurturing as a female, as a mother. Certainly was afraid, what kind of man am I going to end up marrying? But I knew I was not going to marry a man like my dad, because I was going to bring children into this world who would deal with like verbal abuse. And basically that's what it was, growing up with verbal abuse, because my dad expected perfection. And it was like, I could get 100, and it was like, well, why didn't you get 105? And I remember too, as a child, I played sports, and I excelled in sports, and my parents were never there. And I remember people always asking me, where are your parents? Because, they're like, you're an awesome player, and, you've got a lot of abilities. And it was. I was ashamed a lot of times because, I played softball at the time. I would hit a home run. I'd make an awesome play, and everybody was cheering, and everybody's looking in the stands going, okay, where's her parents? And I remember the coaches always saying, well, why aren't your parents here? And I know even at a couple, as I got a little bit older, the coaches would actually come and pick me up to bring me to the games and the practice, because my parents, they weren't involved. They had other things. So it was interesting. So I always felt like I had to get my dad's approval. And so I had to excel in everything I had to do, but I could never show emotion. And so as a female, I don't think I would develop that. It was always about being strong, don't show emotion, excel at everything. And it was kind of like I guess because growing up in a military environment, I felt like I was growing up as a soldier. And that's how he treated me. It was like, yes sir, no sir. And it was like, you do this is my rules, and there's no any other way. And so I never learned how to have an opinion. I never learned to voice anything. And that's why, like, when I met Ray, I was shy. I was socially in debt. I didn't know how to relate to people. I don't know how to talk to people. I was uncomfortable. And for me to like go to a party or to be in a social setting was very uncomfortable. Because I just kind of sit in a corner like a wallflower, and I'd just be like, please don't nobody talk to me. Don't come talk to me. And that's why, like, when I met Ray, he was completely different. He was, friendly. He was funny. He knew how to break the ice. So it was like a fresh of breath there. It was something like I've never seen before. And so, it changed my life. And I think God brought him into my life for a reason. And he brought him in at the best time, because from finding out that I was adopted, and then having the dreams, and then my mom passing away two years later, if he wasn't there, I don't know where I'd be, because I didn't have any support. So, but at the same time, I question things too. I'm like, okay, God, I didn't start off in this world in the best circumstances. Obviously, you protected me throughout the years, because I didn't have anything horrific happen to me. I wasn't like abused or, God forbid, I guess now you have the sex trade industry, and so nothing like that happened. So, and I had good parents. They provided me with, the essentials and stuff, and a college education. But that's all I knew, and I thought, okay, that's all you need in life. And so when I met him, I think the timing was right, and he's the one that kept pushing me to find my parents. And at the time, I was like, no, I can't do that because my mom is still alive, because we were in high school and I shared the story, and I said, I can't go behind her back because she told me horrible things about her. And so I said, maybe one day I'll look. I didn't plan for her to die when I was 20. So it was sad because I was in nursing school. I wanted to help people. And here she turned around and she died. And so when I went back to nursing school, I dealt with other patients who had died at that time. And I told myself, I can't do this. This is not my profession. So I left nursing school, went back and just got a business degree, and kind of was like searching, like, what's going on? It's like every time I have something good that happens in my life, something bad happens immediately after that. And my relationship with my dad at the time was just, it deteriorated. And that's when he kind of said to me, he goes, there's 3 things that is important for you, and that's, he goes, you go to school, you take care of this household, and whatever else time you have is your social time, but you won't have much of that. And and you have to realize, at the time I was 20, 21, and my friends are like, why do you put up with that? I mean, you're a grown adult. I mean, you don't have to deal with that. But like I told Ray, I'm like, where am I going to go? I didn't know I had brothers or a sister. I didn't know my parents were still alive and such. And growing up as an only child, I didn't have anybody to share things with. Because I know, he had siblings, and you can always fall back on that. But I just felt alone. Yeah, and you really can't, talk to your friends. I mean, you're in high school. They don't want to hear that kind of stuff, and they don't understand it. I mean, first of all, I didn't share that I was adopted with anybody. And then to sit there and say, well, my dad's, a jerk and stuff, because, it's embarrassing and stuff. And you don't... And I've always been very, very closed. I don't share a lot of emotions, and I don't share what's going on in my life and stuff. I'm a very private person because I was taught that, what stays or what happens in the home stays in the home, and it's no one's business. And so, but one of the interesting things is, like Ray told me, is that God is kind of your, father figure.
Yes. And
so for me, not having a father figure, I'm sitting here thinking, okay, so is God he's obviously not like my dad. But I had no other experience.
Right.
So I didn't know. I'm thinking, okay, if he's a father figure, my dad's not the best father figure. I mean, what am I supposed to be looking for?
Yes, how do you compare?
So that kind of threw me off, and I was kind of back and forth. I had up and downs. I'd be interested in learning more about God, and and what's this whole, why is Ray so passionate and his family so passionate? And I spoke with Mary Virginia a couple of times. She helped me through my mother's death, and she shared things with me, and I realized she went through a lot. But she had this uncanny faith that no matter what happened, she's like, you just leave it to God. I mean, things aren't always going to be perfect. And I realized that. But I thought, man, here's this woman that's gone through way more than I've ever done. I mean, I've only been on earth for 20 years, but still, she has all this faith, and that she ended up raising 3 perfectly beautiful kids. I mean, for me, you think of a single mom and her circumstances, the kids could go astray. They could get into drugs, violence, gangs, and things like that. And they grew up loving, one of the things I was very impressed with was their respect for women. And I saw that in both Reese and Ray. And they're very both affectionate. So I saw that family, and I wanted to be a part of that family, but it was how much do you share of what's going on in my life? And so...
what was the breaking point for you when the Lord really began to push this issue?
When my mom died, because I felt alone. Ray was there for me, and he didn't push me. He didn't say he would, I wouldn't cry. I remember it was a week, and then it was my mom's funeral. And people were coming and people were crying, and I just remember sitting there like just, it was a blur. And he kept telling me, it's okay to cry, it's okay to cry. And I said, no, I'm not gonna cry. I said in front of my dad, I'm not gonna give him that justice. And so I think everyone had left, and I was there by myself. And so I told Ray, I said, just give me a minute. And so I remember I went into the chapel there, and it was an open casket. And I went up there, and Ray was up there with me. And I guess because she died of a heart attack, they had to do an autopsy. So they had to do the makeup and everything. And I remember I went up to the casket, and I just kind of looked at her. And then that's when I guess it hit me that she's not coming back. And so but the one thing I remember, I looked at and I said, this doesn't look like her. I said, they did the makeup wrong. Their hair's not right. And so then I remember that's when it hit me and stuff. And I just like totally broke down. And then I think Ray's mom came. And she said, just let it go. She said, go ahead and cry and let it go. And my dad was there, but it was like he was a stranger. Like I didn't want anything to do with him. But then it was awkward because I was relying on another family to console me during that time. And so our relationship deteriorated after that. He didn't like Ray. He didn't like Mary Virginia. He thought they were cults and that they were trying to recruit me and turn me against him and stuff. So he forbid me to date Ray. So we snuck around. And it's interesting being an adult and, sneaking around and being dropped off at midnight and hiding. And I think he knew I was dating him. And the last straw was, I remember he told me that if he ever saw him, on our property or anything, he was going to kill him. And I didn't think he was serious. And so the final straw for me was I was at home. It was miserable, and we had an incident. And I remember I called Ray, and I said, I can't take this anymore. I said, I need to get out, but I don't have any place to go. And so he talked to his mom, and she said, no, she can come live with us. And I was very prideful. It's like, to go into someone else's home that you've only known them for maybe a year and a half, and to have them, unconditionally take you in, not expecting anything. So I was like, well, I don't know. So I remember, and I was scared of my dad. I didn't know what he was capable of doing. So he went to work that day, and I remember I packed everything. I didn't tell him anything. I wrote him a nice little letter. And I guess this is kind of the influence he had. I remember the night before, I cleaned the whole house. And I remember I was on the floor, like, scrubbing the tiles. Because in my mind, it was like, all right, I'm going to leave, and this is my way of telling you thank you for everything you've given me. Because when we had that incident, the thing that came out of his mouth is he told me, he said, you know what? He goes, you're not going to date that guy. You're not going to ruin your life. He says, because you're an investment to me. He goes, I adopted you, and I put 20 years of, time and effort into you. And that's not how your life is going to go. He goes, you're going to go to school, you're going to, find someone to marry that's going to take care of you. And he's like, that guy has no future. And he's not going to, as far as I'm on this earth, he's not going to have anything to do with your life. And that's where is the turning point where I was like, this is not a good situation. And so I remember Ray and Toby came. They wanted to come and get me right then and there. And I said, no, I don't want any confrontation. And so they came and they got me, and I went and moved in with them. And then, of course, after that, it was hell. He called and he threatened their family. He threatened me and such. And even at one point was like, I'm taking you out of the will and all this kind of stuff, and called me all kinds of names and being ungrateful and stuff like that. So what I ended up doing is I think he disowned me. Didn't talk to him for 15 years. I think the sad part for me is when I graduated college, I got married, and even when I had my children, I didn't have anybody on my side. When I got married, I didn't have my mom. I didn't have my dad to give me away, so we had a family friend that Ray and I had met through. And so even that, it was just, it's like you're in a cloud and you look down below and you kind of see your life happening, but you're not really part of it. Does that make sense? And so, and when I met Ray, I told him I didn't want children. I just didn't want any kids. I didn't want to bring them into this world because I didn't want them to grow up like me. And I knew he wanted kids. And so I think after much discussion that came up, and then I was like, well, I'm adopted. I don't know anything about my mom. And he said, well, what about those dreams that you've been having? And so when I started looking back, then I started to realize, I'm like, maybe that's what God was preparing me for. He brought Ray into my life. I had the dream about the lady, and then my mom passed away, and then that kind of opened the door for me to go find them. And so Ray's the one that said, you know what? He said, now is the time for you to go find them. You don't owe anything to your parents and stuff. Your mom's gone, your dad's not in your life. And being pregnant at the time, I was concerned about genetic stuff. And so one day he went and he had my adoption papers, and he had a friend who was a PI, asked him if he could look into it. He did. He called him back 30 minutes later and said, I found him. And I didn't know how to feel. I felt like I was betraying my adopted parents because I've always heard they were bad, that my real parents were bad people. They didn't want me. Why would you want to go look for them and stuff like that? And so we pursued it, and I developed a relationship. I found out I had a brother and a sister. My parents were still together. I guess through the whole process, what kind of infuriated me, or I questioned, was I was in Korea for 3 years, and during that time, my dad, I tried to figure out why didn't he ever come back and get me. I was an American citizen. He could have came and got me. She wouldn't have been able to come. And but as soon as I was adopted, he came a couple months later to come get her, and took my mom back to the States. So it was like, why couldn't you come and get all three of us? I mean, the two of us, and bring us back. And I look back and I realize I missed out. I grew up as an only child. I always wanted a sister or a brother, and I had siblings. I didn't get to grow up with them. So it's just a lot of like questioning those kind of things. And that's why, like I tell Ray, even my struggle now with God, I wonder, like, why does things like that happen? Like, why me? Why did my sister and brother get to grow up in a normal household? Why, they got to grow up with my parents and the life they had, and I grew up completely different. Yeah. And so I don't know if God had a purpose for me. I mean, obviously he had angels watching me.
Well, do you feel like he's had a purpose for you now?
Yes, but I still struggle with him because I guess my concept of like a religion is that if you're a good person and you believe in God and you're faithful in your walk and stuff, then why do you have bad things happen? And I see so many other people out there who I don't. And I know it's not my place to judge, but I see people who aren't walking in faith and who aren't the best of people. And it seems like they have good fortune or
Right.
good things happen. And so I struggle with that. And sometimes I'm like, I know like when my mom died, I turned my back because I was like, why would you take her away from me? Because she was the only thing I had at that time. The only thing I've known since I was 3 and the only one that ever really took care of me.
Right.
So that was hard, and I didn't understand it. I'd always ask Ray, I'm like, why? I mean, if God is that great and he's supposed to love you and take care of you, why would he take the one thing that has, I guess, matters to you?
Well, it's interesting because there's something that's kind of ignored largely through Christianity, and that is suffering. And that so a lot of these things we go through, they temper us and make us into who we are. And so that it's the understanding that God doesn't, he allows things, but he's not the one that gave your mother the heart attack. That was just a health issue that happened, and maybe it was preventable, maybe it wasn't. But so I think sometimes in our Western Christianity, it all should be a nice little package, and nothing ever goes wrong in the family. That's really not true.
I guess the biggest change I could say that when I started having faith back in him is, like I was saying, my dad and I didn't talk for 15 years. And he actually came back into my life just out of the blue. He called, he needed my help. And Ray and I were living in Austin, and I remember I thought, is this a joke or is this a prank, or is he going to come and take out our family or finish the job? I don't know. Mm-hmm. And I was hesitant, and even after he was so ugly and awful to Ray and his family, Ray said, no, let him come. Let's see what he has to say. Let's see, what he needs. And I remember he came up to Austin, and I was terrified. And I opened the door, and I was just shocked because he looked horrible. And he came in and didn't know how to react to him. But by that time, I was a different person. I've had children. I've been with Ray. And I remember I just grabbed him and I hugged him. And I thought, oh, this is strange. We don't do that. And he hugged me back. And he came in, and he sat, and he said he needed my help. And that he met the kids, and he actually sat down and he apologized to Ray. He said, I was wrong. He goes, you were the right person for my daughter. Obviously you're doing well now, because he was working at a good job, and I mean, everything was going great. And I remember he went up and he hugged Ray. And he told him, he said, I'm proud of you. So to have a man that was very cold, a perfectionist, never admit that he was wrong on anything, to say that he was wrong, apologize, and then, absolutely just, he was phenomenal with our kids, nothing like he was with me. And to see, I guess, he was a different man. And I don't know if maybe he was ill and he knew his time was coming. But we had like good 3 years with him.
Yeah, he came up every Wednesday.
Yeah.
He came up every Wednesday from San Antonio, get here at 2 o'clock and stay till 10. And just hang out with the kids the whole time, just loving them.
Every week, like clockwork, he would come
He
up.
was there for my whole family. My dad got in a motorcycle accident, and we were all up here, and my mom had all the kids down there at the ER by herself. My dad was on his deathbed, and Jack jumped in the car, went right over there, grabbed all the kids until we got there.
And this is a man that wanted to kill him. At one point when I went to the house to because he wanted me to sign off on some paperwork. And I remember Ray dropped me off. And I told Ray, I'm only going to be 10 minutes. If I'm not out in 10 minutes, then maybe come check on me. And so I went in, and he was just belligerent, cursing and just calling me everything. And I remember I was just like looking at my watch going, okay, has it been 10 minutes? And so I remember I was sitting there, and he said, oh, I've got something for you. I thought, okay. So he came around the corner, and he had a gun. And he said, this is what I have. And he goes, and this is what I have for the SOB, which he met Ray. And I was starting to get terrified. And I remember I was praying. I said, oh, Lord. I said, please don't let Ray come to the door. I said, because he'll do it. Because like he told me, he goes, I'm an old man. He goes, I don't care if I spend the rest of my life in prison. He goes, as long as, he said, as long as I can, you know, get my vengeance on him. And so I said, well, I got to go. And I remember I was walking to the front door, and he kind of blocked me, and he said, well, I'm not done. And so I said, okay. So he just proceeded to yell and curse and everything. I was like, how am I going to get out of here? And as I was sitting there talking to him, the horn went off.
Because I fell asleep. Hit the horn.
And I was like, oh no. And he was like, what the hell is that? He goes, did you bring him here? Did he bring you? I was like, no, that's nobody. And so I remember, I don't know, it happened so fast, but I remember he said, I'll be back. And so I remember I opened the door as soon as he left. I ran out, I jumped in the truck, and I told Ray, let's go. And he's like, why? And I said, let's go. And my dad was walking out, and he sped off.
He came out and he stood on the sidewalk, just gave me, a look of death. He said, don't you ever come on my street again.
What did it feel like for you to have him apologize? What was that moment like?
Ooh, that was pretty awesome, because when she got in the car, well, to kind of back up a little bit, we had to go get his name off of her bank account. It's got a joint account. So we had to go to the bank that day to sign it, and then take the paperwork to him to sign. So when we're at the bank and she signed the paperwork, I'm just kind of sitting there, and on the bank person's desk was the Isaiah, I don't remember, 54:17, or no weapon ever formed against you shall prosper, is what I read. And then we went to Jack from there. She went inside, and then she got out and said, let's get out. So we left, and I'm like, what's the big rush? And then she told me that he had bought that gun and was going to kill me. And I just had a big smile on my face, and she's like, what are you smiling for? He's got a gun that wants to kill you. And I said, well, no weapon ever formed against me shall prosper. I said, I just read that today. And so we kind of went on from there, and then, it was 15 years we didn't see him or hear from him. And I remember we were in the living room sitting there, and he was just sitting across the chair from me, just staring at me. It had already been probably 2 months, because he came up every Wednesday and stayed the whole day and just hung out with us and just talked. And it's probably been about 2 or 3 months that we had been going through this. So we were, talking a lot of stuff, and he was just staring at me. And this is a man that his brother did something wrong to him. He never talked to his brother again in how many years? Till his brother died, 15, 20 years. He never talked to his brother because he had that much pride. And so as he's looking at me, I look over, and he's got tears in his eyes. And he says, Ray, he says, I want to let you know I'm proud of you. He says, I was wrong about you. You're a good man. And I'm sorry. And he's crying. And I was like mush, man. I'm like, what? And then he came over and gave me a hug. And this guy didn't hug anybody. He gave me a big hug.
That was the first time in my life I ever saw him cry. He didn't even cry at my mom's funeral. So it was like, and I told Ray, I was like, my gosh. I said, this is a miracle. I said, this is a man I thought would never, ever change. He would be like, how would you say it? If God had like a project to change somebody, and he would be the challenge. He just was a very, very tough exterior. Like I said, didn't show emotion. So when he cried, I was shocked. I said, he's never cried in my life, and here he is crying over you, who he hated and wanted to kill.
But then a little time down the line, I realized, because I told Sue, don't worry about your dad, because I'm praying for him. And after all that happened, a little down the line, then I realized that for a long time, I've been praying Colossians 1, 9 through 11 for him. And
What is that? What is that kind of abbreviated? What is
it's basically, Lord, your word says you put the person's name. And so, Lord, let Jack do you, let Jack walk in you, let Jack experience your experience, let Jack, show Jack. And so I prayed that for him years. And I pray, actually, my uncle taught me that prayer when I prayed for SueAnn. I prayed for SueAnn for about 3 years, and then that's when I went to the power team, and she did the altar call, and she gave her life to the Lord. So then I started praying that same prayer all the time for Jack. And then when I saw that, when he hugged me, and just, he had broke down, I was like, that's God, for just breaking that through. That felt good. Just to be accepted by him, that, that had hated me for so long, would call the house and cuss me out. And then for him just, the great thing was to see where SueAnn's walk came through, because SueAnn, the way that she was brought up, she could be cold. If she decided, Steve, I don't ever want to talk to you, she could shut you down like that. And for Jack to do what he did to her, I thought, she'll never let him back in. And we were at our house one day, and the phone rang, and she answered it. She's like, hello. And he's like, hi, Sueann, this is your dad, Jack. And she goes, oh, hi, how you doing? Just like she just talked to him yesterday. And he was even blown away, because he's like, I can understand if you don't want to talk to me. I understand. She goes, no, how are you doing? What's going on? And to see her change to just immediate forgiveness and to love him, through everything she's been through, just to see God work in both of those type of situations was just amazing.
And he was a wonderful grandfather.
Oh my God.
I told Ray, I said, I never would have thought that. He hugged and he kissed and he loved on the kids. He constantly wanted to hold them, do things. Well, and the funny part is I told him that I found my parents. And he was a little quiet at first. And he said, really? And he said, how are they? And I said, they're fine. And he said, well, good. He said, I think he said, I hope they do a better I hope they do a better job this time around. Because he said, you deserve a lot better or more. He said, but that's up to you. That's your relationship with them. And he said, but, just want to let you know that you had far worse things happen than what we told you. So just be careful. And so it kind of resonates, because when I did develop my relationship with them, it was good at the beginning. And I think a lot of it was a facade,
Yeah.
And then I started seeing the things that they told me. I started seeing the truth about that. Things were coming out. And so after about 7 years, the relationship just wasn't healthy. And I didn't need a mom and dad at that time. I was almost 30 years old. So for me, it was good because, my mom passed away, so I was able to find them. And I think now I understand why she passed away. It made perfect sense to me now, and I have some closure, because had she not passed away, Ray wouldn't have been in my life. I know that. And I know I wouldn't have found my parents, and I wouldn't have been wondering, where do I come from? Why did they give me up? A lot of questions. And Jack wouldn't have came back in my life. So there's circumstances I understand now. There was a road for me to get to this point. So I'm getting better every day with my walk.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
We all are.
it's struggle, but it is. And it's hard when I guess because I look at Ray and Reese's life and I hear things, and they went through a lot of bad situations as well, but they had a parent that just loved them dearly. And I know their dad was out of their life, and he's back in their life now. But I mean, Mary Virginia's a rock. She's a mom, like for me. When my mom passed away, I mean, she became my mom. And so she's taught me a lot about God and faith and forgiveness. And that's hard for me. I don't know how she forgives. Even at my age now, I struggle with that. So.
That's a pretty good story. Your story is long. Keep going.
Oh, man, that's it, actually.
Anyway, well, thanks for sharing that